Anyway, look, to introduce to you all the legendary Kevin Rhowbotham, who since the late 80s has been a major figure in education, to the point where I almost had to drag him in here under a duffel coat, just in case somebody recognised him. And I can spirit him away out the front door if there's any trouble. But he was a massive influence on all of my generation, and we remain friends, so which is unusual in this business. And so very kindly, Kevin agreed to come in and chat about this second of our subjects, which shall I just briefly say something to get us going? The subject is functionalism, and I think this is a little less precise in terms of idea than rationalism that we had last week, and more precise in terms of period. Now we could, because I certainly associate functionalism from the time between the wars, between World War I and World War II. And although that would be contradicted by other sources, if I was to look in a dictionary of architecture by James Stevens Curl or somebody like that, he'd probably start citing sources like Louis Sullivan, who's much earlier, or Viollet-le-Duc. Yes, and we might come back to that. But seeing as Louis Sullivan's writing, and you have heard of him because you did him in Cultural Context 2 last year, his writing is largely impenetrable and the buildings don't look as if they're very functional in terms of their appearance. I'm putting him to one side personally, a little bit, we may come back to it. And seeing as Viollet-le-Duc was an influence on this gentleman, a contradictory influence in the sense that William Burgess didn't agree with him and ended up doing remakes of ancient castles, that doesn't feel like functionalism to me either. So I'm stuck in this sort of notion that functionalism happened after World War I and kind of before World War II. I'm still a sucker for it in the sense that I believe in open air, sunshine, good heating and sanitation. But I find myself looking for sort of deeper resonances in some way, ironies and entertainments, perhaps even a nationalist angle when I start talking about German product design. Lovely Germans that we have in the audience. And now, of course, we have to remember, although we might associate we're talking basically about Western architecture, that the most devout functionalists would have appeared in the former Soviet Union, as we talked about last week, where your bread and butter was on reducing, drainage lines and all the rest of it to make more housing. The more drainage you reduced, the more people you could house, and that was the ethos of the former Soviet Union, of course very different from the ethos now. The second set of functionalists, I suppose, these days, which might amuse one, those who present slaves to computing power, that would be one kind of functionalism. And then there's a third bunch, which I know quite well because of my studies in Las Vegas, the placemakers, the people who are busy fiddling with rooms to try and get more money out of them. Actually 10% of any Las Vegas casino is busy being refurbished as I speak right now, sometimes with actors playing builders, because for entertainment, of course, because they're fine-tuning the environment. What would you like to start with?
What I'd like to start, frankly, before we go into the pictures, to begin, well, I think, certainly in the UK, and probably, worldwide, and this partly due to the influence of Liverpool and its relationship with the United States, specifically New York, which I'm expert on, but the work of Paxton and Brunel was, of course, hugely influential. These two great engineers, later to come back as primary paradigms for architects like Foster and Rogers, although really their cutesy sort of techno-formalism wasn't really, for my book, anything as authentic as the approach of Paxton and Brunel.
Of course, he was a gardener, wasn't he, Paxton, to start with?
Well, Paxton, he designed the Birkenhead Park. Now, Birkenhead Park is fascinating because it is the first publicly funded facility in the UK. It was the first publicly funded facility. In other words, money came from central government to fund the building of Birkenhead Park, which had never been done before, and I suppose it was, what was it?
It was the ethos was to actually cure the population, wasn't it?
Well, this whole
Pretty much
story. Well,
functionalist.
this is a story about functionalism too. That you know, the problem. There were TB epidemics at the end of the 19th century and in the early 20th century, which were tied by many critics and commentators to the rise of functionalism, and you know that there was to be a clearing out of the miserable marginal housing in the East End, the slums of the East End. What was it called? The slums of the East End were very interesting because during the late 19th century, there's a lot of speculation about the origins of the human state, its relationship to early human cultural forms. Obviously, because this is the period of Darwin and a number of other commentators who are bringing an understanding of, the anthropological development of man to the fore, which was counter to the ideology of the time, which is profoundly religious and took the Bible as the means by which humans might understand the condition of creation. So the East End was considered to be a state. Whilst people like when there were Victorians like Livingstone attempting to find the missing link, an existent human form which would link Homo sapiens with early anthropological human forms, the metaphor of this kind of evolutionary Darwinism was placed on to the description of social conditions. So the East End of London and the East End of Berlin and the marginal areas of major cities like New York and so on were considered to be territories foreign to bourgeois sentiment. In other words, there was a fundamental division in society. So modernism came along after the First World War, although the seeds had been set. The seeds had been set prior to this. First of all, I think, with the mathematical advances in structural engineering, which had brought about, and civil engineering, which had brought about the products produced by Paxton and Brunel. And secondly, the problem with the health of large sections of marginalised areas of major cities.
And more than that, you have the mental health of people. So you would later have Freud, of course. We could sort out what's in people's heads. We can sort out their sanitation, or we can sort out the amount of glass they have in their buildings to improve response to TB. And we've got new structural means coming along in the sense of concrete construction, which will allow that to happen.
Fortunately coincidental.
You also, of course, have the destruction with World War I of what? What happens? What is destroyed? Remember your Downton Abbey. Do you remember Downton Abbey? No. In World War I. The class system, indeed. So your Downton Abbey, they may respond, they may get upset, but I remember, is it D.H. Lawrence who starts ranting about the decline of the English, sort of class system. So all
Lady Chatterley's lover,
the seeds
banned
are right
in this country,
yeah,
associated class division,
yeah,
and eroticism, which
yes, because we have photography, so we could photograph people nude. So they were bathing, and that usually used to be the province of the artist. Only the artist could see people nude, but suddenly photographers could. So all of this stuff is happening at the same time, as well as your mental health. Goes a bit crazy. But one of the things I would say straight away as a sort of provocative statement is that the prime functionalists actually fought in World War I, in the sense that Walter Gropius, the two that come to mind for me, Walter Gropius and Richard Neutra, both had a really nasty time. Walter Gropius got 2 Iron Crosses, or the equivalent. Richard Neutra was shot to bits in the Balkans. It ended up, 25 years hence onwards, that Richard Neutra wanted to fix the personalities of people in, would you believe it, California, with his architecture. Literally thought he could straighten people out. And of course, we have Walter Gropius, who is we associate with functionalism, I think, with the Bauhaus.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we can't really get away from that. But is it? But the question is it? And the others who didn't, because of course Le Corbusier, remember, only had one eye. So he didn't fight in World War I. Mies didn't fight in World War I. No, Mies did on on the Eastern Front, I think. But Le Corbusier didn't, Alto didn't. So those characters were far more mild-mannered. The real functionalists were straight from the front, funnily enough. And one thinks, perhaps, if I was to extrapolate, it would be something to do with conditions like, experiencing the evil of the machinery or the possibility of the machinery, but also perhaps living out of a kit bag for a short amount of time.
There are also seeds of functionalism. We really ought to sort of set out what functionalism is first, and because in order for it to take hold as a high art, this is the issue, and you'll hear us soon arguing about two poles. One is the stylistic pole, which calls itself functionalism, and things to do with utilitarianism and utility, which also associates itself with this idea through people like Taylorism. Taylor was a rate checker. I don't know whether you've come across this. He's the guy.
Taylorism, folks?
Taylorism was established in the United States as a means by which work rate could be checked and efficiency could be improved. In other words, that the function of the worker could have it independently, its efficiency improved. But we won't go into that. Things to do with Fordism and so on.
While we've got an image, here is a picture of something called the Frankfurt Kitchen, which was a product of, I think, 1926. And it was designed by a woman, a feminist, who, and these days, of course, back in 1926, you have strident figures working in both West and Eastern Europe. This particular character had an extraordinary career. 10,000 Frankfurt kitchens were created, and they were designed on the basis, notice there's no kitchen diner. No, because that was the old way of doing things. You'd almost sleep in your kitchen with your... in the old days before this was a functional kitchen which was only for cooking. So the notion was that the woman would get the cooking done quicker because it was all so well organised. Actually, in actual fact, it rather backfired in practice because the female found herself imprisoned in the Frankfurt kitchen. And there were some very funny things like these drawers here, which aren't very responsive to meddling kids, so the flour and sugar went all over the floor, and all sorts of other amusing things. But it is one of those prototype, mass-produced kitchens that IKEA or something might be. You might associate with IKEA these days.
I mean, we call it the Frankfurt kitchen.
Yeah.
It's also called the galley kitchen. The galley kitchen is taken from boats. It's
Absolutely.
taken from, of course, and this is a favourite metaphor of Le Corbusier. The galley kitchen is now the standard strategy for all residential development in the world today. We build galley kitchens all the time. Galley kitchen is effectively one with a worktop with cupboards over it.
It was designed. You came in through here. The sliding door into the eating area was supposedly that it would make it more efficient to deliver the food. This is your ironing board here, and a window out on the world. It had some nice functional features in the sense that certain woods were used when they thought, like for instance, the container for flour, I think, was a certain had something that was resistant to mealworm. So you could tailor this as a series of products which suited the function of the particular elements of the kitchen.
Since the 1926, you have twin bowls.
There you go.
Yeah.
Those are the scoops.
Well, these are still in use, but the twin bowls is an absolute.
That's her name. Margaret Schulte Lishotsky. I believe she was Austrian.
Oh.
And you can look her up in the Architectural Review because they did reputations on her not so long ago. Extraordinary career. She found herself famous at the age of 98 after all of her endeavours. And she spent all her time, funnily enough, given the fact that she designed a kitchen, not cooking. She never cooked a meal in her life. Because, like so many philanthropists on the left, she was actually quite bourgeois. And therefore wouldn't be seen in the kitchen. Nonetheless, as I said, 10,000 of these things did find their way in the various large housing estates of, in this case, Frankfurt, when they were refurbished.
Frankfurt, Siedlung.
Yeah, nice, I reckon.
Very nice.
There it is in its original. I mean, one might get amused, of course. Again, amusement being one's things. This is the stove. which was applied to the Frankfurt kitchen. Clearly it would use, your coal fire and all the rest of it, and it's got knobs on it and all the rest of it. If I was looking at a contemporary kitchen that some of you folks are working in if you're part-time, it might be like this. And
the galley kitchen. It's just the same.
No. When I last used this kitchen, my sister-in-law has this. It's in St Albans, of course, a dreadful place, absolutely horrendous environment. Anyway, she's got one of these hobs here where once you turn it on, of course, you've put your pan on there, boiling water and so on, and of course the thing comes to a boil, and then she went to answer the phone. And then and it all goes everywhere, and there are no knobs on it to turn it off. So there's the whole performance of us, sort of with boiling water, trying to dab this thing. Yeah, no, there aren't any knobs. Not on this one anyway, because it's a whole new seamless world without knobs now functioning.
It's an induction hob.
It's not literally this one. I'm just putting it in.
I mean, let me tell you,
exactly.
This is not good, and it's
Cleaning.
Well, here we are. That's a perfect intro.
Exactly.
Here is the utilitarian view. Unless you're cleaning, right? So that cleaning becomes, or the organisation of cleaning in its most efficient form, becomes the fundamental point of departure for an architecture. Now, in my view, that would be awful. In fact, that is the state in which architecture currently resides, and it is soulless. It is without quality, just like this room, just like this kitchen. Why do you want to solve a problem? So this is part of your ideology of utility. You want to solve a problem. If you want to solve a problem, tell me how we got here, right? Tell me if God exists, or tell me what's going to happen when I die. There is no problem in the kitchen. People have cooked things for millennia, thousands and thousands of years. What is the problem? You're merely expressing a utilitarian ideology which puts you straight into a relationship with the market. All you're talking about is pounds, shillings and pence and profit.
Indeed.
I don't want to hear this.
Because, of course, if
I'm
you
an
look at
architect.
grand designs or whatever... in a minute, Wesley, in a minute. When you look at grand designs, they'll all have a white kitchen, won't they?
Yeah.
All of them.
Well, I do hundreds of these things. They're all the same, And they are because they're pressed into service by the demands of the market, by developers who require you to produce a particular effect for a bottom line cost. And so it's all the same.
So in a sense, the title here, what we started with, this term functionalism, has got to be underwritten with this myth that both Kevin and I share, that it's a myth of efficiency. That architecture is something more than...
Well, let's that there were I can't remember his name now. There's a guy at the Bauhaus produced a drawing called Existence Minimum. Do you remember this?
Yeah.
What was his name? Bauer. Bauer. Existence Minimum was a box in which a man was folded over, who bent over completely, holding his ankles, and there was a box around him with an opening in the top. That's Existence Minimum. Right? You can exist in a very tiny space, but of course you don't want that because it's not suitable to the market. You can't sell a 4 square metre. I could design you a 4 square metre pod in which you could sustain yourself. You don't want that, do you? So this is not about efficiency. That's ridiculous. It's not about efficiency at all. It's about terms of the market, demographic, what the demographic values are, and how those values can be marketed for maximum profit.
That's different, from some kind of historical moment. To go back, I'm very keen on... Here's a version of... You might remember this image. It links with the image about World War One. The guy in the plane. This is from the Villerageurs. Here are, of course, the objects which are to be cast aside because they are not fundamentally not useful and bourgeois, or under a different ideology, just sort of kitchen porn, right? Mm-hmm. Right, the equivalent, just aesthetic. And here are objects which are useful to Le Corbusier. It's hilarious, this, isn't it? Nice boots, hammocks, garden furniture, and so on. I mean, it's kind of hilarious, but you have to remember, of course, that Le Corbusier would only be a functionalist in the sense that he did care of planning a kitchen in a reasonable way. We talked last week about how the modular would get involved. There would be an overlying order of something else, a mathematical order on your kitchen, which you wouldn't be able to see, which would bring it into some other zone.
Well, it's certainly not into a functional zone.
Exactly.
But I mean, just that picture, from my point of view, those objects are equivalent. Well, of course they are. I mean, what you see is a collection of objects on the right-hand side which have a reduced aesthetic. They're not fundamentally more useful. How can they possibly be more useful? You know, this is just an ideology that's laid upon them in order to support the aesthetic. And why is this important for you? Because you mustn't buy this ideology of the mechanism, of the utility, of functionalism, of more efficiency, unless it's absolutely the case. Well, that sounds like a PR line to me. What product isn't hands-on? You mean some conscious product where we don't like television?
So you mean like a spade or something like... Look, Corbusier would have liked that, wouldn't he? He'd have liked a spade for you to work your garden. Probably wouldn't have liked a television. He would like a vacuum cleaner. There's the images of that we know of the so-called lyrically efficient life that Le Corbusier...
But this isn't the point. The point is, what is the difference between a spade with a straight handle and a spade with a rilled handle? That's the issue we're talking about. In other words, if you make a decorated handle for a spade, Corbusier says this is not as good as the one with a straight handle. Functionalism, it's from my point of view, is window dressing.
Well,
it covers up a fundamental drive in contemporary culture towards utility. That is, how can we fit products to the market, basically?
Can we go back to functionalism that you might...
Well, ergonomics. I mean, this is really funny, isn't it? Again, I would urge you to distrust any description like this, because that description can be laid on anything. Is this book ergonomic, right? Is it as ergonomic as a computer? Well, when I read the book, it doesn't give me it doesn't tire my eyes and it doesn't hit me with certain kinds of radiation. But this is not really what is meant, is it? What it's meant is, can I feel it and does it fit into a market category which I can describe as ergonomic? You know, so many chairs are described as ergonomic, and when most of them are bloody awful to sit in.
Well, that's true. I mean, a good example would be this fan, which I've brought along to illustrate something. It comes out of the Ulm School of Design, which is a German school which is developed out of the Bauhaus. And you can quite imagine that when I first saw this in a book on the designer called Dieter Rams, this is the sort of book you find on Dieter Rams in Shoreditch these days.
Yes, right.
Which is terrific stuff. I mean, if you're interested in hi-fi separates and their history, it's definitely your kind of bag. The problem is you probably would never buy a Braun, to be honest, hi-fi or preamp, because they're notoriously not as good as, say, other manufacturers. But that's neither here nor there. Here is a fan developed by Dieter Rams, which, of course, as soon as I saw it in the book, of course, I thought, oh, yeah, nice. So you go on eBay, and you kind of go, oh, there's a yellow one. It's really poor. Because we're in the consumer marketplace, let's be honest. Yeah, exactly. This is what happens. I'm not going to beat myself over the head with it. But what is very funny about it, of course, is it's got a very, very odd mechanism. And you can do cool things like that. Oh, it makes a funny noise if you stand it. The weird thing is, it is almost completely useless as a fan.
Yeah.
And that really is the proof of the pudding. It really is a piece of graphic design. Now, Dieter Rams is very much quoted across the design community, saying, I'll bring up before we get to Deuter, I'll bring up the example because I'll put it in a quote, and you'll see what I mean, see how it gets close to branding, so we can discover your ideology. So this is his description of good design. Good design makes a product understandable, it clarifies structure, better still, it can make the product talk. At best, it is self-explanatory. Now that just feels like sexy to me, as opposed to actually meaning anything. Do you think it means anything, Kev?
I think this is a result of the emergence of public relations and the advertising industry in the United States. which was a huge influence on the nature of political sensibility in the States. You see where it's ended up, and it was fundamentally influenced by German Nazi propaganda strategies, which were extracted from the Jesuits. So there is I mean,
this is what
let's take this apart.
A scary piece of branding.
If we say understandable, what does that mean? Does this mean we can determine its fundamental ontology or epistemology, a kind of sense of being, or it departs a kind of knowledge? Of course not. No. It doesn't mean that at all.
So it's an efficiency myth.
It's an efficiency myth.
It's an efficiency myth. And it got worse and worse. If Ulm came out of, the Bauhaus, you can now see pretty much branding agencies, the real thing, Coca-Cola or whatever. I mean, obviously, clearly, those of you who've read your Jean Baudrillard are aware of this term. It's a very funny term, isn't it? That it's the real thing, Coca-Cola. It's Coca-Cola. Since when did it become the real thing? Or worse, how come it became more real than everything else?
It precisely isn't the real thing, because when it was first marketed, it contained Coke. It contained the drug. And, of course, the United States stopped its production with that additive. So it's precisely not the real thing. It's a fake of what it used to be. I presume that they displaced the Coke and added extra sugar, which is what hits you on the back of the throat. Yes, highly problematical.
Now, when we were...
But let me say something. Why would you want to design a plate twice? A dinner plate. Why would you want to? I mean, if you're interested in efficiency, you'd only have to do it once. They're all the same, aren't they? But clearly they're not the same. You could buy 1 million different plates. So what really is happening here? You're not buying the efficiency of the plate, you're buying its product image. You're buying its product image. So if it's slightly turned up at the edge and it's associated with some kind of international designer, and you could put it on your, your black ash table and bring them in and have dinner, everybody feels happy, but it's not efficient. It is not functionalism, and neither is it rationalism. It is marketing.
It's consumerism.
It's consumerism.
Now, is there, though, in this, things that we would enjoy, perhaps, even with the critique, can we still go somewhere to enjoy some functionist architecture, Kevin?
There's no problem with enjoying it. What I'm interested in is how we tell the truth about what is happening, right? I'm very much interested in producing works that are enjoyable and distancing myself from the mechanical ideology of the 21st century and approaching it from the point of view of consciousness. What I want to see in architecture, and particularly in terms of students, is people expressing their own view of the universe, developing their own view of the universe as sentient, resonant beings, individually operable, rather than under the thrall of the state, who are telling you to do the same thing over and over again, or just to be, as you put it, efficient within a state-structured industry like development, public development and architecture. I want to see people doing their poetry. I don't want to see them becoming functional aspects of an established institutional industry. I mean, you can laugh at it because, because I suppose the end game for you is to make a salary. Well, then you'll make a salary, but you won't be an architect.
You've been told that already.
But I was talking efficiency.
Yes, but I told you that was inefficient.
She stops working. You just need to take the fan out, it will stop.
Yeah, it doesn't get hot.
Yeah, it will stop magically. So
it gets hot when boiling water's on it.
yeah,
No,
you
the
take
pan
the fan
gets
out.
hot.
Yeah.
Well, it's an induction unit, so it has to have the metal on it.
Well, I'm telling you, when the water boiled over, it was bloody hot.
You put it in
Yes.
the line, it will stop.
But the hob isn't hot. It's just.
And that's what I was talking about.
Look, these things are just scientific tricks in the grab bag of, I mean, hasn't it ever occurred to you that after, well, they say 15,000 years of civilization, although some people argue that it's considerably longer than that. After 15,000 years of civilization, all we have are the toys that we play with today. Don't you find that? It's not a success, it's an absolute failure. It's a failure. We haven't done anything. We can't solve war. We don't know who we are. We don't know where we're going. We can't feed the planet. The planet we're destroying it. And we think we've achieved something. We haven't achieved anything. That you can get into a car. I mean, for God's sake, this is pathetic. We have achieved nothing. The human state is appalling. We discuss something like functionalism, and we can't even get to the reality of what this concept actually means in use in the 21st century. When it actually means nothing to do with advertising and PR stunts, but to do with the notion of utility, particularly with respect to human beings. It is human beings that are used as utilised elements, that their value is reduced to an element of payment. You know, you're reduced to your salary condition. You're treated in this culture with respect to that salary level. You're given value in society with respect to that. Is a tragedy. It's a tragedy. And you're supposed to make architecture out of this. It's a joke, isn't it? Really. I mean, can we make a major piece of architecture anymore? No. Not a chance.
Well, it's a little early to dissuade third year from...
They could be considered to be a tiny bit depressing early on in the day, although I'm reminded of a phrase once when I was teaching not you lot, but the first year, and in the first lecture I declared that God was dead. God is stopped. And it got back to Mary Jane. He's back now, but it doesn't matter. It got back to Mary Jane Rooney, who was our head of school then, of course. And she took me to one side as she used to by my lapels when I wasn't hiding in darkened lecture rooms. And she said, "Don't you think it's a little early to dissuade the students of the existence of God?" And I replied, "Well, when are we supposed to start then?" You know, it is...
Well, I could take you on about this, because I don't agree with you. I don't think... I mean, there was a very well-known philosopher called Braus Spinoza. He said, God is nature. And this is the problem now. It faces physics, the most successful of the sciences, head-on, because quantum physics shows that in the centre of the atom there is nothing. 99% of nothing. Niels Bohr said this. Not only that, we can't even observe the state of matter at such small quantity. So, in other words, observing it disturbs the state, so we can never know what is at this level. So we don't know what's at the level, but we can assume that something must be. Why can we assume this? Because nothing can be beget by nothing. You have to take a philosophical view here, not a scientific view. When they speak of nothing, they don't really mean nothing. They fill it up with some, like, dark matter. You know, what nothing means is the absence of everything. Okay, so in the absence of everything, nothing can emerge. So how did these fundamental conditions emerge? The only thing left, of course, is that aspect of the human state which is extremely puzzling. The thing that cannot emerge from matter. And what is that? Consciousness. Nowhere in the universe does consciousness emerge from matter. Nowhere. It can't be made. Okay.
Because, you know, let's have another look at this.
Yes,
because there are lots of different angles we're trying to get. It'll be the same message, but it comes in different ways. So here we've got a picture of what is known as a very functionalist style building. Does anybody know who designed it? No, Kevin will. And I think we both, you know, this is a building by a guy called Johannes Duiker. It's in Holland, and it was designed in 1930. Here's a description of it by one of the prime functionalists, a guy called Alfred Roth, who was Swiss, of course, who wrote a book called NS. NS stands for New School. He'd given up even giving words to things. It says here, in this case, the problems of the open-air school were both categorically defined and solved. The deciding factor was the idea that physical and intellectual development were equally important for the child. For this reason, all the classrooms were given a minimum amount of light and sunshine, and the terraces were planned to serve both fair weather and foul, being covered and partly sheltered from the wind. The physiologically correct solution of the heating problem could only be made by ceiling panels. This permits the whole room to be mildly and evenly heated, without either dust or drafts, even when the windows are partly open. The moderate warmth of the floors is particularly appreciated in cold, damp weather. According to the director, Mr. Wagner's last report, dated July 27, 1948,
all the pedagogical, physiological and sanitary conditions prescribed had been satisfactorily met by this school. The building accommodates the following rooms on the ground, and that's it. It is absolutely defined. Now, we know, of course, because we're architects and you can read a plan, that there's something very interesting going on with this building, which is absolutely nothing to do with Alfred, with Alfred Roth's description, because this is it from the other side. Do you get it? Here it is, an eroded cube, right? Yes, we can see that. And here we have something on the, this is directly on the other side, where it seems to look like a piece of constructivism. Not an eroded cube at all, but a constituted two towers. Don't worry about the fact that there are buildings around it. The buildings around it were built later. And actually, when you look at this thing, all you actually get to see, funnily enough, are these platforms and so on, and some water pipes. And then you look at the plan, which is doing something else entirely. Yes? You look at those two images of the building, and they look, do you agree that they look rather different?
Yeah.
Jackie? I mean, you get it? Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? That's the back view, that's the front view, and here's the plan. So clearly, within the rubric of something which is described as pure functionalism, something else is rocking this guy's boat, right? That was what that should learn. There it is, surrounded by suburban housing. So our interest actually moves on from the base level description. It was a sort of to go back to read some of the amusing moments in our careers in a way. You see, you should all know that a good kitchen has a triangle of work. When we were young tutors, we occasionally disposed of providing students with this kind of information, and so they ended up not knowing what an invert level is or any other numbers of things which are absolutely required. Because actually they went off and did funny things. Now, for instance, you may be familiar with these kinds of drawings. You know, you've all got Neufert's data, right? You're nodding there, you have got Neufert's data. Kind of handy if you're doing kind of layouts for dining and so on. We chucked that out completely. We weren't having any of that. So we did drawings, not me personally, but a Neufert like this. And it was like, you know, Neufert was a student of Gropius. And he set out to document all occasions, including funerals, everything. And so we came along and said, well, chuck that out. And so people started doing these kinds of drawings. And even in this establishment, in Diploma, this was a famous project where...
I remember.
You remember Angela Kyriakou? Yes, where she set about setting up imaginary sexual encounters. Can you imagine doing a project on imaginary sexual encounters in an architecture school caused by lift details? Every single, cupboard was drawn as a potential place of intimate conjugation. We do try to subvert them within our practice, I suppose.
Well, that's the previous slide will show you precisely. Well, the interesting thing about a drawing like this is, of course, that even though it it works with a strategy of defining space or delimiting space, as is given in graphic standards, Neufert, the AJ metric handbook and so on. It quickly shows you that the organisation of, or the inhabitation of interiors goes far beyond this. The nature of using a chair is partly bound up in the nature of these institutional structures, these books. In other words, they determine precisely how you use things. So there was, of course, a movement in London amongst certain students to try and expose this kind of thing. In other words, that of course you have to come to terms with Neufert and graphic standards, because these things are, the delimiting terms which are operated in a commercial environment. However, if any of you have kids, and of course you don't, some of you may, I'm sorry, but you will know that, of course, they do not conform to these kinds of things. So the first question is, how does this restrict my spatiality when these things are used by professional architects like me to delimit interiors in a domestic and work environment? They're problematic. They are lies. They're insidious structures which control the organisation of space. This space is precisely organised in those terms.
By way of argument, though, Kevin, I mean, when Neufert set out to do his set of standards, he wasn't trying to stop you boiling an egg upside down. while you're
Of
doing a
course not.
handstand. He wasn't trying to do that. It's just became the norm. It became a normalising structure.
Exactly. It was, well, look, if you produce something, it can be absorbed into another institution,
Yeah.
which then makes... Let me give you an example.
Does anybody know how to unfreeze this?
Control Alt.
Yeah.
Control what?
Control Alt.
Control.
No. Let me explain this to
you
you.
carry on.
Think of the RIBA, okay? There is nothing in the world, in the universe, that is architecture. Architecture is not a natural category, okay? It was made by human beings, and then to follow it, an institution was created, Architectural Registration Board of the United Kingdom.
RIBA.
These institutions then regulate architecture. In other words, they come into being in order to tell you what is architecture and what it isn't. Where did this come from? Architecture cannot be regulated. It isn't a function of an institution. The institution takes the opportunity to regulate in order to establish itself as a regulating body. There's nothing to regulate. It tells you there is. We've got to keep everything wonderful and perfect and so on, and we've got to make sure the buildings don't fall down. Well, we had a whole medieval period where we didn't have architectural restrictions like that.
And
we didn't have building code. We didn't have anything like that.
And we built the great cathedrals.
We built the great cathedrals without any of that. We built the pyramids without any of that. And the pyramids is another story. Just think on this. There are 22.5 million pieces of granite in the Cheops pyramid, which was built in 20 years, according to the contemporary papyrus. Each one of these blocks is 80 tons. And the population of Egypt at the time was not greater than 400,000 people.
And we still don't know how the Parthenon was created. So there you go. Yabu sucks. It's not so great, is it? So, it might as well be the extraterrestrials. But hold on. Now, once again, in the world of checks and balances, you probably already think that the Bauhaus is a place of extreme functionalists who were most peculiar. I want to remind you all that this is not the case, because amidst the Bauhaus, which is the site, if you like, of what we could call much functionalism, steel tube furniture and all the rest of it, there are a whole bunch of artists and so on, Johannes Itten and Vasily Kandinsky and Paul Klee, who were very much of the opposite persuasion. So listen to this. Who knows what this is? This is a bowl of what? No. No, they all know that. Yeah. It is actually a bowl of polenta. Here is Vasily Kandinsky describing a bowl of polenta. Listen to this. For years I have wanted to eat polenta, so you will easily understand what pleasure you have given me. My heartfelt thanks. For me, polenta is a synesthetic delight, for in some strange way it stimulates three senses perfectly harmoniously. First, the eye perceives that wonderful yellow, then the nose savours an aroma that definitely includes the yellow within itself. At last, the palate relishes a flavour which unites the colour and the aroma. Then there are the further associations, in inverted commas, for the fingers, mental fingers. Polenta has a deep softness. There are also things that have a shallow softness. And finally, to the ear, the middle range of the flute, a gentle sound, subdued but energetic. And the polenta which you served me had pink tones in its yellow colour, definitely flute. Kind regards to you, dear Pavel Ivanovich, and dear Felix Pavlovich. Best wishes to you all. Synesthesia. So within all of this so-called, basic elemental design, you've got somebody talking about the fact that a bowl of polenta is a flute. Isn't that extraordinary? Not by way of meaning particularly much, but it's amazing stuff.
Well, yeah.
The good old Bauhaus.
It's summed up actually by a slide you see me use quite a lot. That one.
Well, you have everybody sitting around. Of course, this is a very good joke, this cartoon, because the gentlemen are all wearing their dark suits and the ladies are all wearing their fashionable, sort of flapper dresses, and they're all sitting on Bauhaus furniture, but they're all sloshed. And they're worshipping some sort of funny deity in the middle. There was always this sort of strange spiritual angle. Perhaps you can never get rid of it.
Well, the rise of the new art, absolutely, and the terms which were counter to what were seen as the excesses of the late 19th century, particularly Art Nouveau, were writ large in a reduced aesthetic. It was the issue here is the aesthetic, not what it says it is. That is that it produces an efficient machine-like interior. However, the issue of efficiency and machinism is the central ideological problem of the 20th and 21st century. We're moved towards the idea that we, not the computer, become computer-like and machine-like.
Indeed.
So that we become machine-like, because machines can't become human, computers can't become human, whatever they're telling you, is drivel.
Perhaps it might
What
be-
can happen, though, is you can adapt yourself to the computer state. And this is, of course, being pushed at every opportunity.
That moment seems like a good moment to introduce a tiny little story about walking along a beach.
Oh, it's called Busy.
Yeah.
He's a bit of a skinny bugger.
He's a skinny bugger on the beach. And of course, you all know this, hopefully, so we'll rehearse it nicely in the sense that you know that Le Corbusier loved the seaside and he loved the beach. And of course, when he picked up one of those pebbles, why was it beautiful to him? Because, of course, the effect on the seashell or the stone was the effect of the weather, i.e. the cosmos, everything, the tides, the wind, everything. That's why he enjoyed these particular objects found on the beach. That's all contained, of course, as Jackie knows, and we all know that those are his obsessions. Night and day, eternal truths of our world. If, and therefore, that's where you might pick up a rock, and we often do, pick up something from the beach and take it home. If, on the other hand, and there are some in the Le Corbusier house, in the Maison Joual, there are, down there, conveniently enough, a couple of things picked up from the beach. Brilliant. So that all represents the cosmos and so on. It explains why we like seashells and so on. If we take a very different view, a fractal view of the coastline, here is the coast of Scotland, and we know that if you know where a fractal comes from, don't you? It's trying to measure something which is clearly very difficult to measure like this. Because in a straight line it might be 10 miles across here, but of course if you're trying to measure this coast, it just depends on how big your ruler is as to how long it becomes. And that becomes the basis for what kind of design parameter? Based in the word parameter?
Parametrics.
Parametrics. So we've got the same bit of beach, and we've got the same cosmos we're in, and we can either develop an architecture from the action of the waves and and all of that stuff and appreciation of those things, or we can simply map the coast in the minimal amount with enormous amounts of computer power, and then what do we end up with, people? We end up with that, essentially, or much better, that, which of course is my favourite representation of the latest building in Antwerp from, of course, the Hadid practice. This is a rather good illustration because, of course, it indicates that the building is a shopping bag. Exactly the same. I think it illustrates quite well your point, Kev, about the overwhelming fact of our consumerist landscape destroying art. Yes, I mean, you have certain opinions about this architecture, I know, which I should not allow you to express.
Oh, I see.
So I removed it. A nice little story there in the sense that, there's one way of appreciating the coast architecturally, and there are other. I don't know whether you're familiar with this one.
I am.
I won't go on for that much longer. This is the house Rhow, isn't it?
Rhow means space, yeah.
Yeah.
Space house.
It's a house. Built in 1923. Gropis is associated with it, but it's actually designed by a painter called Mouche. It was built as it's a startling thing at the time. You'll like it when you see the plan. Very odd, isn't it? The middle bit. The middle bit is like a sort of Pompeian courtyard house. But then you look at the size of the table. And you go, crikey, it's tiny. And all of these rooms became really, really specialised for particular functions. Right? There was no cross-fertilisation of function at all. Everything became really, really defined, just like in the Frankfurt kitchen. When you see, by the way, the contrast, don't ever think Mies van der Rohe is a functionalist, because, of course, if you look at a plan of Lakeshore Drive, you won't even find any double beds. People look at that plan and go, where the hell's anybody sleeping? It's a beautiful plan, but there are no beds. So how did they function as flats? That's an extraordinary moment.
Graphic conceit.
It is a graphic. It's a very, very odd little thing. Actually, when you're there, that looks quite cute. And these are these closed services. Do you think they're unhygienic? I met a plumber the other day. He said he hadn't exposed services in a bathroom for 30 years.
Really?
Which is really peculiar for me because that's the one thing that blocks.
Since you have the panel, remove the panel, but it has to be obscured.
When I worked for Trevor Dannett, we had to use nothing but chrome-plated traps. And pipes.
Bottle traps.
Absolutely.
Chrome-plated bottle traps.
Nothing but those because they were
we did
nice and they were fixable.
Yeah. Well, they're anti-siphonage too, so because you won't know anything about this is technical plumbing, which is something completely beyond the contemporary architectural student. But you will need to know it. You know.
Indeed.
Do you know, I had a plumber who didn't know what bloody siphonage was. Can you believe that? This is amazing. What happens, siphonage, if you want to... When you empty a wash-hand basin into a 4-inch soil pipe, and there are other fittings above it, the water discharges in a 4-inch soil pipe around the inside of the pipe. Helically, like this, it goes down. When the water then covers the opening of a wash-hand basin coming into the soil pipe, it causes a vacuum, and the vacuum sucks out the trap, and so you can then smell the sewer through the soil pipe. The way you avoid this is by putting a small diameter pipe in front of the trap, and connecting it to a higher point on the 4-inch saw pipe. That's called relieving the pressure. So you don't get a vacuum formed at the end of the pipe, and it will not siphon your trap. Now, if you don't know this, you're going to have a lot of people suing you.
Indeed. Because, of course, if you think that architecture is a pretty render, then, of course, this comes as a bit of a shock.
Yeah.
We might finish with a little scheme of things which shows again how the best architects consider the least, if you like. This is a poor little house by Walter Gropius, when he was in the phase just after the Haus am Raum, where he was asked to build 2 houses at the Wiesenhof exhibition in Stuttgart in 1928. Famously, he decided he must apply himself to the task at hand, which was in this case prefabrication. You can see the prefabricated panels, all the rest of it. But of course it did become rather one-dimensional, the whole project. And when the press were invited to review the Stuttgart Weisen, when they invited the great and the good to pronounce on the different architectures, because they were all there. Hans Scharoun was there, Oud was there, the lot.
Corbusier and Mies.
Yes, yeah. Corbusier and Mies sat at the high table, and when asked what they thought of Gropius, I think it was Mies who said, "It's interesting, but it's not necessarily good." And then Le Corbusier said, "When you go to the horse races, you're only interested in the horse that comes first and second, not the one that comes in the middle field." It's a nasty, poor old Walter Gropius had a rough old time. He was a mate in the end of Le Corbusier. Yes, you see, it wasn't enough just to do prefabricated housing. It never is. You've got to know about your drainage details as well. This is the tough business of architectural production. Right? You've got to have all. You've got to, by the sound of it, you've got to know about creation as well.
Yes.
So, be aware.
It's a fairly hard profession.
And harder ever more, do you think, Kevin, now?
Oh, I don't know about that. I think that it's cycling backwards into Sweden, as we've discussed before.
Yeah.
Things are being pushed along
You mean the sort of
ideology.
Caruso St. John sort of world, cycling back to Sweden?
No, it's Caruso St. John.
The sort of, materiality.
No, I don't. I think that I don't mean materiality. I mean repetition,
Right.
and formulaic solutions to all kinds of problems in front of us because of the nature of development. Certainly in the UK, which is all private, and private development through developers. The developers are demanding certain kinds of outcomes. So yeah, we'll get the odd building that might be privately funded or have a single occupant. That's a different matter. But usually, no, they're driven down to formulae. I mean, God knows. I don't know whether you've noticed, but London is a hideous city. Hideous. You think it's horrific because the Evening Standard and the BBC News constantly tell you it is, but it isn't. I mean, look at Elephant and Castle. I mean, geez, no closure, vile. Those tall buildings were an architect I actually admire, but nevertheless, the position of the shopping centre, which is I thought that was planning gain in the 1960s, and it's still there. 50 years later. I know Renzo Piano's redeveloping it, but it will be still. They're just building a big tower on one side, a few. There is no sense in which we might build the city beautiful in the United Kingdom. Nobody wants to do that. What they want is to survive, right? They want to survive within an extremely aggressive commercial environment in which the bottom line is the only thing that is interesting. I mean, you would think after, 15,000 years of civilization that we could actually outdo the Romans, and build a city better than the Imperium in Rome. But no, we can't even get close, can we?
So,
never mind Angkor Wat or any of the South American cities. So we're not even close. We are
So we have become functionaries. Is that
We
the
are
message?
becoming increasingly functionaries, absolutely. In a world in which no player is independent. Please, this is not the evils of development. How developers work is like this. They find a site, they then find investors. They commit to investors a certain return, right? A certain amount of money returned to them after they've lent the money to build this property. They then make a margin. Then they have to pay the bank. The bank wants a margin. The bank has a limitation on the amount of time that the site can be developed. So the developer is up against it. And so the developer seeks a consultant, the architect, in order to produce a building within the statutory consent structure of the UK, which is planning, building control, within the time set by the banks and the investors. So everybody's in jail. The investors are investing in this because they can't get the return if they put it in a bank, right? They need more return. Why? Well, they have their own reasons. So the whole system is cancerous and leads only to bottom lineism. And what the world will burn, and it is burning, and you will do nothing about it. You're becoming architects. You will not complain, you will not protest, you will not do anything. You'll go quietly into that good night, they'll cut your head off, you'll be paid a lousy salary and you'll achieve nothing. Kill yourself now.
Splendid. With that wonderful parting shot. Which I
Or you could create a career which is completely different. No, you could be an architect, but you can actually make something worthwhile looking at.
Indeed, there are ways.
If you're prepared to take that risk, and I think that's the first question you have to ask yourself. Have you got the chutzpah to take on those issues?
It's almost...
And most of you just haven't, and that's the truth.
Yes, which is a story of failure, of course. That's, there you go. Now, you have to live with that. As we know, the heroism may well be necessary. Only postmodernism thought you didn't have to be that, to be heroic. So, with that will do. Thank you very much, Kevin. No, it's a delight. You can now imagine what it was like in 1989 as Kevin ran various studios across London and was escorted by the police out of them at various moments. That's I'm being facetious, but you can understand the scenario. And I'm really pleased that you've had a biteful of Kevin Rhowbotham, so thank you very much. Now I'm going to take you for a drink.
Right.